Ironically, it actually sounds like a Swiss Army knife.
Good point.
And that would be the perfect gifting. Imagine a BitBox and a Swiss Army knife in one package. That'd be an awesome Christmas gift.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good idea. Although it has less pointy edges, I have to say. Guy Swan has like an awesome ad for us. Like he came up with himself that he says it's like the preferred hardware wallet for prisons because you can put it places. I'm not sure if I embrace that. It's kind of funny.
Wow.
Welcome to Bitcoin Basics with your hosts Faris and Gordon. Visit bitcoinbasics.help if you need help buying and securing your Bitcoin.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Bitcoin Basics podcast. Here with your hosts, Faris and Gordon. It is August the 4th, 2022. The price of Bitcoin is $22,850. The block height is 747,918. And Satoshis per dollar is 4,376. Gordon, how you doing today?
Good, thanks, Faris. A little bit unusual for us to be recording at night. That's why Faris looks so sleepy. That's why I look so hungry. But we just interviewed Stadicus from Shift Crypto, and he's came on to talk to us about the BitBox02. I can't actually believe, Faris, that we haven't had him on the show before. We talk about hardware wallets all the time and getting your keys off the exchange and whatnot. And as you know, from the title of the podcast, this is a Bitcoin Basics podcast. So I could, in the past, really only recommend Bitcoin only hardware wallets, and there are only a handful of them. And I think for us, after this interview, although I would like to play with it a little bit more, I'll be changing my recommendation to the BitBox02.
Yeah, so I've received one. I've not had a chance to play with it yet. I'm going to do a review on that, and then we're going to have Roland or Stadicus back on. And yeah, I was very impressed with him. I mean, he was incredibly humble and open as to mistakes that the company has made, ways they could improve, and just this was just, Gordon wanted to play devil's advocate and him with hard questions, and which we thought we did. And he's like, "Oh, give me harder questions."
Yeah, I couldn't actually think of many harder questions, but maybe when he comes back on, I'll think about some more, some better questions instead of softballs. But even the acknowledgement of the marketing breach of some of his customers, completely honest and transparent about that, which is great. And I can't say that's the case for other companies. They usually wait until sort of it gets leaked to the press that happened, and then they release a press statement. So that is
very impressive company, and very impressive individual. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, if you are listening to us for the first time, welcome. Please subscribe and like us on whatever podcast platform you're listening to, because that helps to get the word out about Bitcoin education, and that's what we're about. So please share it with your family and friends. And here's the interview.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, like, and share so we can find others like yourself.
Thanks again for joining us on the show, Stadicus. You might have to explain that one in a second. And we want to get into Shift Crypto and BitBox and everything like that. But how about, I know it's a boring question, who are you? And feel free to answer that however you want.
All right. So we quickly talked about it beforehand, like where Stadicus come from. It's actually like a player name from 30 years ago or so, Age of Empires, the emperor that takes over the world. Never thought it would stick. And now I go to conferences with that name. So that's kind of a funny thing. In real life, I'm an IT engineer. I mainly worked at big IT consultancies like Accenture, PricewaterhouseCoopers. But over the years, I realized I need to follow my heart. So I also started the Raspi Bolt guide, which was one of the first guides that made running a full node on a Raspberry Pi popular. And with that in mind, I joined Shift Crypto, my current employer, which I'm also a co-founder now. I built a full node project at Shift Crypto. Unfortunately, we shelved it over time because market conditions changed. There was so much free competition coming to market, so we might have been a bit early. But not to digress too much, IT engineer coming from big companies. I follow my heart, and I work at a Bitcoin company, which is awesome, and having the time of my life, focusing on Bitcoin and hardware security. Our goal is to make Bitcoin self-custody as accessible to newbies as possible, make it super simple, so there's no excuse to leave your coins on an exchange. And that's what I do now, day and night, when I'm not 3D printing stuff or tinkering with Raspberry Pis or whatever.
Oh, so you're like me. You have nightmares of, if I upgrade my firmware, will I brick my device? That kind of thing.
Yeah. I know that this doesn't happen with the BitBox, but if you run it on a Pi or whatever, it's always a chance that stuff might go south.
Yeah. Before we get into all that, what was your Bitcoin aha moment? Did you go the route that I went through altcoins and then come back to Bitcoin? What was your light bulb moment?
I cannot really pinpoint it anymore. It was quite a while ago. I think I learned about Bitcoin many times before it clicked. Then, of course, Bitcoin was like mind blown. Then Ethereum, mind blown, and all the other coins, mind blown. Read a lot of white papers, had my altcoin phase. But I think at the height of 2017, I sold all altcoins because I just couldn't take it anymore, like psychological stress, like following charts in the middle of the night and all that stuff. And just decided family is more important. My peace of mind is more important. So I'm basically Bitcoin only since then. Although I call myself a Bitcoin minimalist, everybody needs to go through that phase if they choose to, I think. I don't really believe in toxicity or belittling people that do experiments. But for my own purpose, I'm interested in Bitcoin as a money, as an asset, as a revolution, as a tool to separate money and state in the end, maybe eventually, or at least give them a good run for their money and have an option available for everybody who wants to opt out. And if we can achieve that with Bitcoin, just bringing some competition onto the monetary market, I think Bitcoin does its job very well.
Yeah, I can agree more with, especially with your journey as to how you came to Bitcoin. Unfortunately, to this day, I'm still waking up in the middle of the night looking at the charts, which, they say about experience is the worst teacher. It gives you the test without the lesson. What are you finding these days? Because we have been in, I don't like the term, but just for the sake of people out there, a bear market, even though Bitcoin's probably on a logarithmic scale has never experienced a bear market. So if we are technically in a bear market on the price of Bitcoin, what misunderstandings or myth busting are you still coming across these days when it comes to Bitcoin?
So I think the narratives against Bitcoin change over time, although there are some evergreens. At the moment, I do speak with a lot of regular people, which might be the exception for some Bitcoiners, but I still have some contacts that don't own Bitcoin. And their first question today is usually energy consumption. And this straight comes from like a very, very simplified narrative of the mainstream media, where you just compare the energy amount of one transaction to the energy consumption of a whole country, which doesn't make any sense at all. Of course, energy doesn't break down to transactions, and it's not the same energy, it's not primary energy, and so on and so on. So that's the main thought I see at the moment. But from newcomers that actually have like an open mind, I think most struggle still with just like the paradigm shift of what a wallet is, that it's actually not the coins are in the wallet, but it's more like a keychain. The coins are on the blockchain. Where do I buy them? Is it just like a foreign currency or stuff like that? So
who owns it? Who controls it?
Yeah, exactly. So these are like the evergreen questions which I'm more than happy to answer over and over again.
Yeah. So I was laughing because just yesterday morning, I was having the same conversation with someone about Bitcoin's energy consumption. I said, you have to compare like for like. And what is there like Bitcoin, which can provide a service, a store of value to the 2.5 unbanked billion people in the world? There isn't. So there, you can't complain about its energy consumption when there's nothing that you can compare it to. So with that, still explaining to Bitcoin, because I still have this conversation, people say, I finally bought some Bitcoin, and I'll say, where is it? What do you mean? I went to a website and I bought it, and we didn't have to explain that. Are you still finding that conversation with people new to the space a bit difficult? Or are they getting a better grasp of it? Or
I think the information material available to everyone has improved a lot. Most people don't directly go and buy books and read them, but if you just research a bit of online, there's a lot of very good material. And I think it's indexed enough that it actually pops up besides all the scammy and malicious articles. So of course, you still need to do a bit of your own research because there's a lot of misinformation available online as well. But I think most companies in the space put in a lot of effort to explain basic principles, educate their users, not only sell the products. We do the same. We have so many basic articles on our Shift Crypto blog. And because it's just easy to engage in a conversation, and after the first few basic questions, you send them a link and they can read it on their own terms and in their own time. I think that's something that scales very well.
That's actually how Shift came onto my radar. I was looking at, I mean, I've known about the BitBox for a while, but I was looking at multi-sig and solutions, and I'm like, I'm not sure if this is a good idea or not. And I read the article, The Pitfalls of Multi-sig When Using Hardware Wallets. And that is absolutely brilliant. I'll link that one in the show notes. And it's, all about implementing a solution that is quite complicated. And sometimes, most times complexity is the enemy of security. Although I'm not sure I totally agree with that statement. I think if you can make something secure, but it's simple to use, then you can kind of have both. But anyway, I'm getting off the track. We're talking about hardware wallets. And here's your opportunity. Feel free to pitch or whatever. What is the BitBox02? Perhaps just going through your features and maybe some of the differences between the other manufacturers.
Sure. Maybe I take a step back and quickly present Shift Crypto first, because I think we have a pretty cool history as well. Many people still don't know about the BitBox hardware wallet, but development actually started in 2015, which is ages ago in the crypto space or Bitcoin space. And back then it was called a digital BitBox. Now we call it BitBox01, as opposed to our current product, the BitBox02. And the Shift Crypto was actually founded by Jonas Schnelli and our current CEO, Douglas Beckham. So two very hardcore Bitcoiners, like Jonas being one of the only people as a Bitcoin core maintainer that could actually change the code in Bitcoin. And although he's not as active anymore, both in our company or in Bitcoin core development, he's still a great friend. And it's great to work with people like that. So the first BitBox came to market, I think, at the same time as the Trezor. Ledger was not yet founded even. So we have a lot of time that we spent on developing our products. We're an open source company. Everything we do is open source. All code is open source. We even publish the hardware specs, everything, to minimize trust as much as we can. We're based in Zurich, Switzerland, and the BitBox is actually made in Switzerland. We produce it in Switzerland. which is a great help in keeping the supply chain secure. So it's not like something that is made in China and shipped to Switzerland and then we stamp it and sell it. It's actually made and programmed by us. So yeah, that's what we do. We also have some other products like backup accessories and some cool hats and t-shirts, but the BitBox02, the hardware wallet, of course, is our main product, and almost all engineering efforts go into that.
And Faris and I talk all the time about open source, and we try and be open source education and get it out there. There's a lot of misinformation. I'm not going to go into it, but just for our audience, we've talked about hardware wallets before and how some aspects of the hardware wallet is open source, so the actual desktop or mobile wallet, but the actual firmware, basically the operating system inside the hardware wallet is not open source. And so maybe you could just go into, you've got that dual chip design and how you're open source throughout the whole process.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we are pretty proud of our dual chip design, the security architecture that we built upon. And before that, you basically faced a challenge or a choice that either you had physical security by using a secure element or a secure chip. This is what Ledger does. But if you run the code on that secure element, you are not prevented from open sourcing or publishing the code because it's protected by NDAs, and it's basically trade secrets, right? So the manufacturer of the chip does not allow you to publish the code. And that's fine to some extent. But you just trust the manufacturer of the hardware wallet a lot. So you, first of all, of course, you trust them to not be malicious, which I would never accuse anyone of, but you also trust them to do their proper research and bug fixing themselves, because nobody else can look at the code. So the only bugs that could be discovered is internally in the company. And that's not something that scales very well. The other extreme is the model that Trezor, for example, has. They also open source all their code, which is awesome. I respect them a lot for that. But they use not a secure chip, otherwise they wouldn't be able to do that, but just a general purpose microcontroller, basically a computer chip that you can find in any coffee machine. They run great and secure code, but they're not physically secure. So when I was at the Breaking Bitcoin conference, I think 2019 or so in Amsterdam, Ledger actually presented how they broke the Trezor and read out all the secrets in like 5 minutes. Of course, that's like super scary. I agree with Trezor's assessment that hardware wallets mainly protect you against remote theft. That means like viruses, malware, stuff that comes over the internet. And they do a great job in that. But for me personally, I think a hardware wallet should also protect your keys if you lose it on the street or you just have it in a drawer. And if someone breaks in and gets physical access to your device, that's not really possible with an MCU, because if you have a semi-decent electronics lab, you can read out the content of these chips. So what we do is we combine these two chips. We have both, and we use a secure element to physically harden the device, but we don't trust it, and we don't run the code on that chip. All code still runs on a coffee machine chip, which is fully auditable. But the secure chip is still part of the security architecture, so you would need to breach the secure chip as well physically if you want to decode all the secrets. So I think in that regard, we have the best of both worlds, and a product that is fully open source while still being physically secure.
That's fascinating, Stadicus, because this is a conversation we have a lot, because Gordon and I often talk about and explain to our audience a trade-off between security and convenience. And the most secure way for someone to control their private keys would be something like a Steal wallet or But someone new to the space, you're terrified because you think, I can easily lose this thing. I can easily lose a piece of paper. So noobs coming into this space, to them, all right, if I lose this cold storage device, I know all I got to do is buy another one. I can back up all my coins. And that is a security blanket, an emotional security blanket for them. So yeah, this is why one of the reasons we're excited to talk about cold storage devices, because it's hitting that middle ground of security and convenience.
And listening to that, sorry to interrupt, that immediately pops up like two topics in my head. So first, I think like security versus usability is a false dichotomy. For me, and we stress that over and over again, I think ease of use is part of the security. If something is hard to use, it makes it less secure because you're tempted to take shortcuts. You might make mistakes. So in the full extreme, like if you set up your own air-gapped computer that is like maximal secure, take out the network card, etc. That's super secure, but it's also extremely hard to use, and you only need to like mess up once to like blow out the whole security into the internet, and that's it. So having something that is easy to use and secure, I think, is doable, and this is definitely our goal. And the second thing is that the hardware wallet and the steel wallet or the backup. I'm always very clear that they both are like an integral part of securing your Bitcoin. So if you have a hardware wallet, the job of the hardware wallet is to keep your keys secure, but also usable. So you can use your keys, receive coins, send transactions without worrying about viruses or malware on your computer. But the job of the hardware wallet is not long-term storage. Long-term storage is the job of the backup in whatever form. It can be just a piece of paper that you put somewhere safe, could be a steel wallet. But of course, if you have like a steel wallet that's super secure and it will last centuries, but you can't use the keys, because that's so much math involved. You need to import them first to sign a transaction or even just to generate the receiving address. So you need both.
You actually triggered me with about 10 questions just then. So, but just going back to the air-gapped solution, and I know Cold Card, and I've used Cold Card, and this is an honest comment because I think I've said it on the show. You know, sometimes there's a lot of security theater, and some of the things that they do, for example, with air-gapped computer, and without going into it, instead of having things plugged into the device and whatever, you basically take that activity offline and you use a micro SD card and you transfer the transactions between the computer and whatever. As you said, that increases the complexity, and there's something that could go wrong to that. And also you're inserting an SD card into your computer. And what if your computer has malware? Well, if it's a hardware device, it's unlikely to be able to actually get to that device. But if it's an SD card, if it was Bitcoin-specific malware, it could actually change transactions and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I'm getting off the topic. I believe you guys are the only ones who have an encrypted connection, noise channel, I think it is, between the hardware device through the USB bus to the computer. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's correct. So the first time you, so again, a step back, you get the BitBox. Of course, there's no keys on it, as it's the case with all hardware wallets. You need to set up your own wallet, and it needs a lot of entropy, randomness, to generate your seed and your keys and everything. And then you back that wallet you create a backup of this wallet. But the first time you plug in then the BitBox, you use it with our own BitBox app, which is available for all platforms, including Android. So you never need to connect the BitBox to a computer if you don't want to. You can just use an Android phone and do everything, including firmware updates from there. And the first time you connect these two, you see it at like a confirmation code. You know that stuff. For example, if you like pair a Bluetooth device or something like that, You just need to confirm that the code that you see on the BitBox app matches the code that the BitBox02 hardware wallet displays. And if you confirm that, you know that there's no man in the middle, there's nobody listening. And from that point on going forward, you have an end-to-end encrypted communication channel from the BitBox app to the BitBox. And that means that even if you have malware on your computer, it's not like 100% proof, because of course, like the channel keys are somewhere on your computer as well. So if you have like super targeted malware, it might still be able to like somehow weasel itself into the communication. But if you're just listening to the USB traffic, or if you have a malicious USB cable or something that logs all the data from like an adapter or whatever, it will never be able to listen into the communication of the BitBox app and the hardware wallet, which is not really a security feature, to be honest, because the BitBox app doesn't believe anything the computer says anyway. But of course, it's great to improve your like the privacy of your transactions, like and just minimize the attack surface.
Yeah, and you have an excellent, Shift has an excellent threat model page, which I'll link in the description, because you actually go through all the things, all the online, offline, all the attacks that Faris and I have been talking about for years. And it's done in such a succinct way that anyone buying a hardware wallet should be looking at that first, because you guys have obviously thought about it. Not to say that other hardware wallet manufacturers haven't, but there's obviously a lot of thought that's gone into that.
Cool. Thanks.
So in terms of backup, because other solutions and people who've got a hardware wallet will be familiar with the 24 words. So you've got your hardware wallet. If you lose it, no problem. You buy another hardware wallet. As long as you got these 24 words, you recover them onto that device. But you're going an extra step and having a backup onto the SD card. Is that another layer of complexity, another thing that people have to store, or what was the decision behind that?
So from what we experience, especially with people new to Bitcoin, there's something that we call mnemonic anxiety. So maybe you remember back in the days when you set up your first hardware wallet and had to write down 24 words. You had no idea what these words are. You were super careful not to make a single typo or anything. You didn't know that only the first 4 characters, for example, already make the word unique. So even like, is it singular, is it plural, all that stuff is like super confusing to newcomers. And of course, it takes a while. You should do it in a private space, not have anyone like looking over your shoulder, stuff like that. This is why we think if you initialize your BitBox02 and you create your wallet, the first backup you do is on the integrated micro SD card reader, whatever. So it comes with everything. The micro SD card is enclosed with the device. So you basically set it up, you do a backup, you have your micro SD card, and be done with it. We have a speed run, I think, on Twitter, setting up the BitBox in under 1 minute, including the backup. And I think from a usability perspective, that's really valuable. Of course, you still have the option for the 24 words. That's also available. And we also recommend that. But maybe at a later stage, once you have received the first transaction or whenever you're comfortable and understand it a bit more. But I don't think the medium actually is that important where you have the backup, because contrary to popular belief, like if you don't use the micro SD card and write and read constantly, this thing lasts decades and it's not susceptible to electromagnetic interference. So it's really secure. But more important than having one super secure backup is that you just have to like redundancy. And then you should always assume that one backup can go missing or go corrupt or burn down with your house or whatever. So if you have 2, you're good.
One thing I want to ask you, Stadicus, and this is a low-tech question. Recently, we had to help one of our clients move their private keys for an exchange into a ledger. And was a bit of a nightmare because the cable to her MacBook Air, we had to try so many times because Ledger Live just was not picking up the Ledger device, and we had to try different cables. But from the BitBox operates differently. You don't actually need a cable. It can go straight in, and you have these little adapters. Can you just talk a little bit about what led to that? Because I looked at that and, operating on a MacBook Air myself, I'm thinking, oh, wow, that's awesome. It would have solved this problem. Okay. And you mentioned as well that you don't even need a computer. It can go via a phone. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? And if, these issues other people were having, was that part of the design?
Thanks. Yeah, great question. We talked about the BitBox and they didn't even show it. So that's the BitBox02. And you can see it has a USB-C male adapter. So the decision behind that is we're moving more and more into a mobile first world. So what I can do, I just take my phone and plug it in and it lights up. So you see there's like a screen. If it's not plugged in, you don't even see that it has a screen. So it's like really a super like private device. Nobody would expect that to hold like thousands or maybe even millions of dollars. So if you have a modern laptop, you just plug it in directly, USB-C. Every Mac should have that, I think. Of course, if you have a desktop computer, every BitBox comes with an extension cable. So it's like a USB-C to USB-C. So you can use it on a MacBook just with a bit more like wiggle room. And what we also include is a little tiny adapter, USB-C to USB-A. So you just plug in the cable and then you can plug it into any legacy computer or whatever that has a regular USB adapter. And all that's included. That's one of our premises. You buy a BitBox and you shouldn't need to buy any accessories if you don't want to. So everything's already in the box.
Well, I'm impressed, Faris, because it works on a Mac, so it must be pretty good. You looking at other, and I just noticed today actually that Trezor has a Bitcoin-only firmware. Could you explain why BitBox? Because I think you have two models. Want to store your XRP in Ethereum, and the other one's Bitcoin-only. Why do that? And also, I guess a sub-question that the Bitcoin-only firmware, is that just a subset of the overall one, or is that a rewrite from scratch?
So let me quickly check. So what we actually do is we do sell a Bitcoin-only device. And for us, we try to avoid security theater. So with competitors that have Bitcoin-only firmware, you can actually have a device running Bitcoin-only firmware, but you can reflash it with whatever other firmware without even unlocking the device. So there's absolutely no security advantage in having it. What we do is if you buy a BitBox02's Bitcoin-only edition, which, by the way, we sell about 50-50. So it's the same price. It has less features. People still buy it 50% of the time. So people see value in that. You will never be able to run any other firmware on that device. Then, of course, you can update, but it's always Bitcoin-only firmware. And we guarantee that. Because the main reason behind it, from a technological perspective, to have a Bitcoin-only device is to reduce the complexity of the device. Every line of code, every external dependency that you might have is a potential attack vector. The more code you have, the bigger your attack surface. And it's at the moment, it's more of a theoretical advantage, I have to say. But less code means less attack surface. Less external libraries mean less external dependencies. So in theory, the Bitcoin-only device is really more secure. And of course, then if you cannot like simply flash whatever other firmware, then it's actually a security feature. What we also find is that people like to buy it to gift to people they care about. and prevent them to immediately buy Bitcoin 2.0. So it's like hand holding a bit the gift recipient to show, okay, here's your secure device. You're welcome, but you cannot store any Ripple on it.
It's like having a house with only one door, and you protect that one door really well instead of having a house with like 1,000 doors around it. It makes total sense to me. I was going to be playing devil's advocate, and I'm really struggling to find some attacking questions here, but I'll try. Why? So I just looking at your website, BitBox02 is $129, and that's not including the shipping. Why shouldn't someone go out and buy a $50 Blockstream Jade or $70 Trezor One?
I mean, these devices are probably secure. I am not a hardware hacker myself, so but I wouldn't assume. I think they're already great, right? On the other hand, if you store like a lot of coins, I don't think the price point should be too big of a difference, because you need to compare the BitBox02 also with second generation hardware wallets like the Trezor Model T, which I think is over 200 euros, or the Ledger Nano S, which is also, I think, close to or 180 or so. We're actually a bit cheaper than the second generation hardware wallets. With Ledger, I would always reply, well, if you value private, like physical protection, then you should get a BitBox or a Ledger. With Ledger, I would always reply, if you value open source, you should get a Trezor or a BitBox. And with the Jade, I have one here. It's a nice device. I think it's fairly decent, but of course it's like general purpose computer hardware that is not made for mass production. And it also doesn't have a secure element. They have something like a virtual secure element, but I think that's somehow server-based. So there's maybe a multisig involved or Blockstream co-signing. I'm not really sure, but it feels like complicated to make it secure. And overall, I think the user experience of the BitBox is simply the easiest to use for beginners. And we always say it's like the easiest to start, but it grows with you. So you have a lot of expert features that you might not be aware of in the beginning, and that's by design. We don't want to confuse you, like connecting it to your own node or using Tor or all that stuff. You can all do that. You have coin control and whatnot, but it's not like in your face. If you don't care about it or never heard about it, you probably don't see it. As soon as you learn that it has value, it's there.
Ironically, it actually sounds like a Swiss Army knife.
Good point.
And that would be the perfect gifting. Imagine a BitBox and a Swiss Army knife in one package. That'd be an awesome Christmas gift.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good idea. Although it has less pointy edges, I have to say. Guy Swan has like an awesome ad for us. Like he came up with himself that he says it's like the preferred hardware wallet for prisons because you can put it places. I'm not sure if I embrace that. It's kind of funny.
Wow. Well, moving on from that, that's brilliant, and that's one of the reasons why I can't recommend a hardware wallet that doesn't have a secure element. As I said before, like I'm sure I've never used Blockstream Jade, so for online attack surfaces probably okay, but as you mentioned before, like brute force and physical access to a device, if you don't have a secure element, that device is gone. And if it's a Ledger, the firmware is closed source. So, I mean, Ledger has a reputation to protect. So I'm sure that they're kind of doing the right thing, but you don't know. You have no way of telling.
But for us, it's really also a kind of sticking with the Bitcoin ethos to have everything open source, build on the shoulder of giants, publish the codes for other even to reuse if they choose to, and just like fight transparently, because security is always like back and forth. And what open source allows us to do is, of course, to also run our own bug bounty program. So we encourage independent security researchers to look at our code. And if they find something that we can improve, we pay them a bug bounty, even if it's a non-critical issue. So it's just like about incentives. We don't have anything to hide. We are up, and I think it needs some sort of humility as well. If people come with improvements to you, you need to be open and put your users first. But I think we've proven in the past that we do that without thinking twice.
Is that Gordon sometimes a scary thing? Sorry.
No, you go first. Sorry.
I was just going to say, is that sometimes a scary thing? You've open sourced everything, you built a business model around it, you've got a product, and people are able to potentially find a game-changing exploit in your code.
Yep. I mean, there's definitely pros and cons, but I think in the long run, and I record this conversation on my Linux computer. It's been shown over and over again that security by obscurity just doesn't scale, because then only people that actually want to exploit your code are incentivized to look at your code. And they will sooner or later, maybe a little bit later, but still they will find vulnerabilities. But you don't give anybody honest the option to find it first. And then you have an attacker at hand. If you follow the open source ethos and be very transparent, have a bug bounty program, be like professional enough to be transparent and not too proud to admit that there might be some mistakes, and just fix it and put users first. I think that's something that scales, and it's what I personally would expect from the manufacturer of my security device that holds my own life savings.
I absolutely couldn't agree more. And before Faris gets in, security by obscurity is something do you listen to Steve Gibson's Security Now podcast by any chance?
Not
okay.
Regularly.
Anyway, he mentioned that all the time. And the analogy is sort of like security by trying to hide something. So for example, you hide instead of hiding your front door key under the mat, I'll be really clever and I'll hide it in the pot plant, or I'll hide it in the second rock in the garden. If someone doesn't find it, they can't get it. But if someone actually gets your key, it's game over. So you should just make a more secure door, like just design a system that is more secure instead of trying to hide all this stuff. And that's what closed source is. It might be secure, but probably more often than not, there aren't many people looking at it. Their employers work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And, having less eyeballs on it, having less people see the code is usually a huge disadvantage. But I have a very important question for you. What flavor distribution of Linux are you running?
I use it for business stuff, so I just use the Ubuntu. I'm running so much other stuff, but all based on Debian somewhat at some down the line. I'm not a fan of continuous updates like Manjaro or Arch Linux. I mean, in the end, it just needs to run. And Ubuntu or whatever Debian system does that job very well.
I'm running Manjaro.
The reason I'm laughing is when Gordon and I first started educating people about Bitcoin, the number one thing he wanted to set up was how to set up a separate Linux hard drive, and we've got, I think, 13 hours of video guides on how to buy Bitcoin. Those 13 hours is everything you need to do before you even think about buying Bitcoin. And part of it is we just show people how to set up Linux hard drives. That's why I'm laughing. Because you're preaching to Gordon, and you've just got a new fanboy in there, I think.
No, I was a fanboy for about 30 seconds until you mentioned Ubuntu. I'm out of here.
Sorry about that.
No, I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding.
Just a tool.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a rolling release sort of person. So I change distros every 3 months, and I'm currently on Manjaro, but I'm sort of hopping around a bit. Faris, you go before we get down a Linux rabbit hole.
No, I just want to talk about open source, because me personally, coming from a non-tech background, open source was one of those things where by the time I actually understood it, I really, really valued it. And a lot of what we do now is when we're explaining Bitcoin is we explain open source, because one of the big misunderstandings or hurdles, intellectual hurdles people have is, well, who created Bitcoin? Who controls it? And, most people would not know that, half the world is running on Linux servers and all this kind of stuff. So when you explain open source to people, then they comprehend, and it is another light bulb moment. And I think that's why for us it's really important that we explain open source to people and even before we're explaining Bitcoin, it really helps you understand it. So yeah, kudos to you for running open source. And I know with Gordon, whenever we talk about anything, we can't go a day without him mentioning open source somehow. So it's nice. Something I've come to really, really appreciate and just go, oh, wow, it is quite a phenomenal, not, I wouldn't call it movement, but just, grasping open source is quite revolutionary. Religion. Thank you.
Definitely. And I think it's always like comparing the power that one company has and all the brain power and all the innovation. If you have it closed source, you basically go against the ingenuity of the whole rest of the world. If you're like trying to compete with open source, it works in some aspects if you have very focused products or like business customers and stuff like that. But overall, even Microsoft starts getting more and more into open source development because Microsoft against the rest of the world is just something that will not work like in the long term.
Yeah, I think they just serve in every single Fortune 500 companies using open source in one way or another. So, and I can't remember
actually Linux.
Sorry. Yeah.
So it's funny you mentioned Microsoft, because one of the examples or analogies I use to explain open source is Encarta versus Wikipedia. When Encarta came out, no one would have guessed that this Wikipedia thing, which anyone can contribute to, would overtake Encarta. And it only took a couple of years.
Yeah. So it's like the hive mind putting together all their innovation potential. I think that's very powerful.
So we're all about privacy here as well. We talked a lot about security and different forms of privacy. Obviously, with a secure hardware wallet like BitBox, privacy is just important. And for those who don't know, and we've talked briefly on the podcast about running a full node. We haven't really delved hugely into it. We probably need to, but we certainly have said why it's important. Because even if we use, say, BitBox02, we're still, checking price and doing all kinds of stuff through your servers. So could you maybe explain why running a full node is important, and maybe a bit about the Raspi Bolt?
Yeah, exactly.
Node. Yeah.
So first of all, like running full nodes is very important. I think there's always two aspects to holding your own keys. So the first is security, and this is the job of the hardware wallet, to keep your coins secure, out of the hands of malware, out of the hands of physical attackers. But then there's also the privacy aspect, and a hardware wallet is not able to talk directly to the Bitcoin blockchain. Even the BitBox app or another software wallet that you can use like Sparrow or Spectre or Electrum that you can also use with the BitBox, they don't talk to the Bitcoin blockchain directly because they're just a wallet, like a key manager. But what you need to be an actual participant of the Bitcoin peer-to-peer network is to run your own node. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have a dedicated device. Just installing Bitcoin Core, syncing the blockchain, that's also your own full node. So that's a very good start. Unfortunately, Bitcoin Core is not really meant to be used with hardware wallets. So usually you have a base layer like Bitcoin Core that talks to the Bitcoin blockchain. Then you have a middle layer that indexes all the stuff and is able to answer the questions like who owns what on what address, for example. That's the middleware that usually is an Electrum server. But the Electrum server gets the information from Bitcoin Core. And the Electrum server then is basically the server backend of the software wallet. So if you have the BitBox app, for example, even on your phone, by default, it connects to our own Shift Crypto Electrum servers. And that means that you lose quite a bit of privacy because, of course, your BitBox app, but that's the case with every Bitcoin wallet, needs to ask the server, could you please tell me, for these addresses, do they have any coins on it? And with that, you basically tell the server what addresses you control. And we are based in Switzerland. We don't track any IP addresses. These are automatically anonymized. We reduce server loggings to the bare minimum that we need to have a reliable server. But still, if there's like a court order ordering us to whatever track some addresses or whatever, you shouldn't rely on us to refuse and close our business just to protect your privacy. So the best thing, again, is to just make ourselves redundant. So in the BitBox app, it's very easy just to remove our servers. And if you run your own node, for example, like a Raspi Bolt, my own project, which is like, okay, I want some pain, but I want to learn how it's actually built, to a Raspi Blitz, which is more automated, to an Umbrel node, which you just download and it runs. It's like Umbrel is probably the Ubuntu of full nodes.
It's the easiest for sure.
I want it to be. I want to care about anything. It's just I just want to have my node. Then you can just remove the servers of Shift Crypto and add your own full node directly in the BitBox app. And the BitBox app never needs to call home again. So that's our answer to protect, also to make you more private. And privacy is one thing. So you leak less information. You tell one less third party how many Bitcoin you have. But you also don't trust one less third party to tell you, for example, if the Bitcoin you receive are actually real Bitcoin.
Yep.
Because in the process of maybe a hard fork or anything, if you don't run your own full node, you don't have a say in it. What is Bitcoin? And you need to rely on someone else to say, yes, this transaction is valid, or we refuse to accept this transaction because it doesn't follow the rules or the consent, the Nakamoto consensus. And if you run your own node, it's like your coin, your keys, your coins, your node, your rules.
Yeah, that's excellent. We need to definitely talk about full nodes, because I've done my own dedicated full node, running a Linux server and all that kind of stuff. But I know that's not for everyone. And I think Faris was interested at one point, but he'd probably kill me if we went down that road. So as you said, there are many different Linux distributions, and you've written actually the guide for the Raspberry Pi. And has that got a Lightning node in there as well?
Yeah, you can link on it, maybe in the show notes. It's RaspiBolt.org. Okay. It starts off with setting up a Raspberry Pi with the Debian-based operating system, making it secure, adding Tor, all that stuff. Then you install Bitcoin Core, you install your own blockchain explorer. So you don't need to look up like transactions on a third-party blockchain explorer and leaking your IP address together with the address that you just looked up, which is also kind of a privacy loss. You install your own Electrum server, so you can use your node with your hardware wallets, which I think is very important. And then you install a Lightning node, you install many other stuff, and there are many bonus guides. So I think it should cover every angle that you might have. And we try to keep it up to date. It's no longer just my project. I open sourced it as well. So there are like many contributors, many maintainers that also can update the guide and keep it like correct and current.
So Raspberry Pi plus, say, an external hard drive, SD.
It's basically what you need, yeah. Raspberry Pi plus an SSD, which what I would recommend, like 1 gigabyte, and that's it.
And that's
again,
pruned.
you don't need to have a dedicated device necessarily. There are ways to install Bitcoin Core on your own regular computer. For example, then use Sparrow Wallet, which can connect directly to Bitcoin Core. And then you can connect the BitBox02 directly to Sparrow Wallet and still keep your keys secure. So that's something that is also really well maintained.
Faris is getting sleepy. He's in New Zealand, and I'm getting hungry. I want to talk to you about multi-sig and maybe why it's not a good idea. I want to talk to you all kinds of stuff. But just recently, as everyone knows, the Ledger and both the Ledger and Trezor's not their actual database, but their sort of marketing database from customers' information, because our email address was in there and I get spam messages all the time from it. What is Shift doing to protect their customers from perhaps physical threats?
So that's a very pointy question, because like 2 weeks ago, we also lost some email addresses. So I will definitely not point fingers to
I didn't know that.
our competitors. Again, I think what we did, and also I can start with why we actually use an external service. So of course we clearly separate like the support emails, shop emails from like marketing emails, which are opt-in. But we do see a lot of value in being able to send usually it's called marketing emails, but for me it's more about education, being able to send out guides. If you buy a BitBox, you can like tick a box and then you get like a 5-step email tutorial that explains in great detail how to actually set up the BitBox and use it and make a backup and so on. I think this is a very important thing. And unfortunately for mass emails, running your own email server is just not feasible. You need to land on one blacklist and your whole domain is going to be blocked for all emails forever. There's no recourse. So it's a very dedicated technology. It needs a lot of know-how to run an email service like this. And unfortunately, that's not something we can do internally.
Yeah.
We used ActiveCampaign and they lost some of our email addresses. Police is investigating. They contracted a security consultancy. So that's probably the most you can do. But I'm very, very glad that we only shared the minimal information with them in the first place. So again, like security by obscurity, it just doesn't scale. You need to just collect the least amount of data that you need. And fortunately, no physical addresses or wherever, we never give that to any external party. Even in our own shop, we anonymize it after 30 days. So it's just like an email address and maybe first and last name, but that's it. And we've seen one spam email so far that went to our users, but fortunately we were able to warn them, also sending them one email. And now we're looking into how to move forward. But again, I think the most valuable thing in that is to be humble, acknowledge that something happened, put your users first, inform them immediately. We gave them, I think, very decent advice of what is affected, what is not affected. Basically, look out for scam emails. That's about the extent. And I think there are some lessons to be learned for us as well. But we will continue to explore and use emails for educational purposes. And there's no such thing as an unhackable service, unfortunately. But I guess at least with being more explicit and more transparent how data is handled, we can improve a bit on that.
I really appreciate it. I genuinely didn't know that, so I wasn't trolling you or anything like that. I just happened to see another spam email this morning from Ledgers. Yeah, whatever. And as I said, the reality nowadays of marketing and the email lists and stuff like that is that, you do have to use third parties, whatever. But as long as people are aware, that's sort of how it's being used. This is how it is. And as you said, as long as it's transparent, the user can click, opt out or whatever it is. So as long as it's transparent, I think it's fine.
So in the European Union, it's actually super explicit with data protection, GDPR. You need to opt in explicitly. There's a double opt-in. You also need to confirm by email a second time that you want to get added to a list. So that was already in place, of course. And then, of course, email is not really a secure technology anymore. I think it's fundamentally broken, unfortunately. But it's still like, it's a good tool. But sooner or later, you should assume that you will get some spam through your email addresses in any case, unfortunately. Which, of course, doesn't excuse us like fucking up with user data. But yeah, just don't put any sensitive information in any external service. And I think that's the best way to do. And
absolutely
that, of course.
Yep. Minimize your information. I was at a coffee shop the other day and they had a rewards program or whatever. And I saw someone else filling it in. They're putting in phone numbers, I'm like, what are you doing? Just for the, buy 10 coffees, get one free, giving away all this ridiculous data. And I actually had a conversation with them about privacy and whatnot. And like, well, what do you put on? I said, well, number one, I don't sign up for those stuff. And number two, if I was, I would put a fake name and a, temporary email address. I mean, and they're like, oh, you can do that, can you? I'm like, oh. So, yeah, we're living in a different reality with some people.
Definitely.
I want to ask so many other questions, but I'll leave them perhaps the next time. I guess I'll just finish on this one last question. This is, I guess, what a lot of people are sort of a little bit worried about is how do I know that I'm getting a genuine advice? I bought it from whatever store. It might have come from a shipping agent. I'm opening a package. I'm about to buy $100,000 worth of Bitcoins on the BitBox. How do I know that someone hasn't tampered with it? Supply chain attacks, all that sort of stuff. Could you perhaps ease people's minds?
Yeah, I'll try to. But I think it's so what you're referring to is the supply chain vulnerability. So somebody in the process of handling devices, maybe even before they are produced, like spare parts, or after they have been produced, that there are no additional chips soldered in, that there's no additional like fake manuals or download links added to that stuff. When you order it from Amazon, you don't know who had access to the device, and you need to make sure it hasn't been tampered with. And of course, it's a genuine device in the first place. So there are a lot of moving parts there. The most important thing is that we start with production in Switzerland, that we can actually supervise and program every device ourselves. So when we put on the cryptographic keys that validate the firmware and everything, that's definitely not outsourced. That's somebody from our key engineering team doing it himself. And doing that allows us to have a cryptographic authenticity check. So if you have, let's say, the real BitBox app downloaded from our website, and you get a fake BitBox, there's going to be a super big red scary warning to immediately contact support, because every time you connect the BitBox to the BitBox app, there's a cryptographic response challenge response check, and only genuine BitBoxes are able to provide the correct answer to the challenge. And the same goes, of course, for if you download a fake BitBox app or whatever other wallet, because the BitBox always assume that the software app is already compromised. Maybe a virus in the backend, but also maybe a completely fake app. So it never trusts the information it gets from your computer. The only scenario where there's really nothing that we can do is if you have a fake BitBox app and a fake BitBox, because of course then everybody can do everything. But as long as one of these components is genuine, you're safe. Another thing is that once you have a genuine BitBox, it's made out of 2 plastic shells. that are glued together so that you can only open it in a destructive way. The whole inside is like filled with military grade epoxy. So if you open it up and try to access whatever, you'll basically rip the chips off from the PCB board. So it's like made in a way that is not, that you cannot open it undetected and put it back together again. And there are many more protections like that. It comes in a sealed vacuum bag with a security print around the edges. And it's all on the website. You mentioned like security features. We go into
it's very, very impressive security feature there.
But nothing is like 100% in itself. We just try to add so many security features on top of each other that it's really not feasible anymore to just ship you a fake BitBox or a tampered BitBox and you wouldn't notice.
Definitely anyone listening, buy it from original sources, buy it from your website. Don't buy it from joeshardwarewallets.com. Although I'm not sure, that may be an address. I don't know. Probably not an official reseller.
I guess it's actually not that bad with the BitBox. We usually don't like discourage people to buy from Amazon if they want to, because the supply chain security with the vacuum bag and everything, and especially the cryptographic authenticity check, it should really hold up even to attacks like that.
Excellent. Well, we really appreciate your time. I have one last very important question, probably the most important question of the whole interview. When was the last time you played Age of Empires?
Because I need to reboot my computer into Windows to do that. It's been quite a while. But every time I get bored, like 2 times a year, maybe, I'll do that. But I'm not really, I enjoy solo sessions. I'm not good enough to compete against like multiplayer online with people I don't know. So I'm a super casual gamer.
Cool. Yeah, you're probably a guy like me.
Enough hours in the day.
Yeah, exactly. You're probably like me. I've got Linux, but I've got that Windows 10 partition. Just occasionally need to play a few games. True. But then I'm too lazy to reboot my computer into it. So I'm like, nah, don't worry.
Exactly.
Stadicus, it's been a real pleasure having you on. I mentioned earlier, I've gotten a BitBox edition I'm going to be playing with and doing a review on. So we'd love to have you on again after that. But for the time being, where can people find you, follow you? Just tell us where you'd like us to send our guests.
So of course, like BitBox Shift Crypto is shiftcrypto.ch. CH, by the way, stands for Switzerland, not for China, how some people expect. Shiftcrypto.ch. We have a ton of information, know-how, blog, threat model, all that stuff. So you can really dig deep to make an informed decision if the BitBox is the right choice for you. For me personally, I would say Stadicus.com. It's like the most bare bones website. It's not even mobile ready, but it has some links to my GPG key or to the RaspiBolt and stuff like that. And I guess I'm most active on Twitter, like most Bitcoiners. DMs are always open. So if you have any questions, feel free to DM me and I'll do my best to answer them.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thanks again for your time and thanks again for your honesty too. I sometimes when you get people on to review perhaps products and stuff like that, they're a little bit rainbows and unicorns, but I think you've given a fairly candid response to all that sort of stuff. But yeah, well, we'll definitely, I will admit I've used pretty much every hardware device out there, including building my own hardware on a Raspberry Pi, which was a disaster. Except for BitBox. So I'll have a play with that. And we would, there you go. We'd love to have you on if you could in 2-3 months after us having a play and we might have some more questions. Yeah.
Of course. And hit me hard with your questions. I don't like security theater, so I'll tell you if something is in or out of scope of our threat model or if we can do better.
Fantastic.
Looking forward to it. Thank you
We're here
again.
for the long run.
No worries. Thank you. Cheers. Thanks, Stadicus.
All right.
Thank
Bye
you
so much.
Thanks for watching or listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, subscribe, and share so we can spread this educational content to others like yourself. Visit bitcoinbasics.help.
Disclaimer. Any content provided by CoinCompass is for educational and informational purposes only and is not investment, legal, tax, or any other professional advice. A qualified professional should be consulted before making any financial decisions. CoinCompass will at times recommend certain products, services, and technologies, but these are opinions based upon our own or podcast guests' experience and not endorsements. We take no liability for out-of-date or inaccurate information, software bugs, manufacturing errors, technology misuse, or issues involving third parties. Visit coincompass.com for more information and please contact us.